So I'd now like to invite Guillaume Couillard, Executive Director of the PMPRB, to the podium to give us an update. And whenever we give acronyms, I like to spell them out. So Patented Medicines Prices Review Board, you all know this in this audience, but always good to repeat it, that there's actually words behind those letters. So Guillaume, the stage is yours, a little early.
Bonjour tout le monde. I'll do it in French now. Hi, everyone. I'm Guillaume Couillard. I'm actually, in government, they love to change your title. I'm now the Director General. Apparently, that's how we're called at my level, so we changed that. So I'm here to provide you with an update on the PMPRB, c'est PMB in French. I know most of you guys know about us, but I'm at the Market Access Summit, right? And there's a perception or a narrative that the PMPRB is a barrier to entry. And that's the first thing I want to do, explain what we are and what we're not. For those who were at the CDA conference, it's going to sound a bit the same, but I'm testing whether you have retained any of my speech that I made there. So the presentation today, I want to do two things. Explain what is the PMPRB, and I put purposely a misunderstood mandate. Because I understand that the PMPRB is a creature that does not exist in any jurisdiction in the world. And I want to provide you with an update on the guidelines consultation. I'm happy to take questions. I know some people are ready to ask me some questions on it, and hopefully I'll be able to answer those. So the mandate. So for just a bit of history there, it was established in 1987. It was part of the NAFTA discussion where we changed the patent regime, and this is why the PMPRB was created. If you have any question as to why it was created, I'm more than happy to discuss them while we're having coffee. I'm not going to spend too much time on it today. But what is very important is the second sentence in this presentation. And this is where the misunderstanding, and I get it. I think even internally there was some misunderstanding about what the PMPRB was or is, and the way we were doing business reflected that. But based on the recent court decisions and internal thinking, I think we start to really understand what we are and what we're not. And the key words there is that we are, the PMPRB, we are monitoring prices. We're not a general price setter. And we want to make sure that the prices are not excessive. Okay, so it's more of a passive role than an active one. Sorry, I have to look at my presentation. I don't have speaking notes per se. So, and the only way we can fix a price is through a hearing. There are no other ways that the PMPRB can fix a price. It's after a hearing. Guidelines cannot fix prices. And in fact, the PMPRB, well, actually, when I say the PMPRB, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the board, is empowered to issue non-binding guidelines to explain how they would look at monitoring prices. So, what we're not a general price regulator. As the Federal Court of Appeal recently stated, pure price regulation or price fixing is not valid. It's a constitutional issue. It's up to the provinces to do that. We are not empowered to set ceilings for the list price of patent medicine, except, as I mentioned to you before, in the context of a hearing. So we're not. And I know where the confusion is coming from. If you look at the 2010 guidelines, for those that know us, there was a price ceiling set, and there was a monitoring of that price ceiling over time. And it was adjusted up and down, looking at the various factors. That the board, what is proposing now is not that. It's to monitor and identify cases that potentially could go to a hearing. One of the key elements is the last sentence in bold. The PMPRB is not a barrier to entry. Like, I know some people would say yes, but technically, legally, we're not. We always look at the past. We never look at the future. So the way it works is we get the information twice a year, from the regulation, from the patentees, and we look in the past as to whether there was some issues or not. We're not looking at the future. We're always looking at the past. And to look at the prices, there needs to be a sale. Like, we have jurisdiction when people are starting selling, and there's a patent, obviously. So we're not giving a ceiling for the future. We're looking at what happened in the past as to whether there was an issue with the actual price. The key issue, and I loved discussing that, and I study a lot, Ottawa U. I'm from Quebec City. I went to Ottawa because I was playing hockey. And I had no clue what the PMPRB was, went to the Competition Bureau after, no clue what the PMPRB was. Then my boss, Doug Clark, moved there at that time, and he said, hey, you should come. Interesting mandate. And actually, if you were interested in administrative/constitutional law, the great book to be written about the PMPRB, because I don't think there's such a place that exists in the world, or in Canada, in fact. And when you look at our mandate, it's found in Section 79 to 103 of the Patent Act. And Section 85 is the key section. And because they say, PMPRB, you intervene when there's an excessive price. But there's no definition of what excessive means. And I guess it's Parliament's great wisdom. It says, well, we're going to name a board, and they're going to determine on a case-by-case basis whether a price is excessive. And the factors are pretty limited, 4 of them. The price of the medicine itself, that makes sense. The price of other medicine in the same therapeutic class. And I'll make a comment about this one. The price of the medicine abroad. So basically the same price of the medicine, but in different countries. And changes in the CPI, Consumer Price Index. It's very tough when you read that to say, well, I know exactly what excessive means. And it's because it's meant to be on a case-by-case basis during a hearing, right? Every single situation may be different depending on the circumstances. One thing I'm going to mention, I'm just going back, about the therapeutic class, which is probably the toughest to understand. I know the Liberal government in 2017 tried to introduce pharmacoeconomic GDP market size, and it was declared invalid. And a lot of the confusion about the PMPRB, even internally, came from, well, let's do some HTA analysis. While the court have said, no, it's not your job. It's up to the provinces to do that. It's up to CDA, INES to do it. So when we look at it, we're not looking at value per se. It's a legal test. It's a weighting test as to, you look at the price of the medicine, you look at the price of the medicine internationally, and then you look at the comparators, and there's a weight to be assigned to those comparators. And it's not about value per se, it's how comparable the comparators are. And I know it's a bit dry or very tough to understand, but from a legal perspective, if you know the concept of a reasonable person, it's a bit the same thing. It's how comparable the comparator. Obviously, if the comparator is way better in all this, it's less comparable than the drug you're looking at. Does it make sense what I'm saying? Or if it's worse, it's also less comparable. So like it's how comparable it is comparable. The comparator is. I don't. So the concept of reasonable person, that doesn't exist in law, right? Is what would the reasonable person do in that context? Well, I'm not sure if I'm reasonable. I'm not sure if my brother is, my mother. But that concept exists in law. So it's a bit the same thing for the TCC, we call it there. And then for those who follow our activities in the discussion guide in phase 2, and I will discuss that, you'll see that there were a couple of proposals by the board as to how we could define that factor. A few things that it's worth mentioning. There's been a lot of changes at the PMPRB. So we have a new chair and a new vice chair, President Thomas and Annie. Highly involved. We have new board members, and more recently, I just met Sharon Blady, former Minister of Health of Manitoba. She joins the board. So we have a full complement of board members. And the good thing, I guess, is that the oldest member now is the chair, and he's been around only for a year and a half. So you guys are stuck with that board for at least 4 years and a half, 4 years. And I was appointed the new DG in April, I think March last year, something like this. I refused it twice. I didn't want it. I got 3 boys that play competitive hockey. And I said, oh, that's fine. But on Fridays, I may be in a tournament. And it was accepted. So at that point, I said, that's it. I'm going to say yes. I was very hesitant about that, but I'm really enjoying it. From a career perspective, it's amazing, great people. PMPRB is small, eh? We are 80. We have some contractors like the HTAP, Human Drug Advisory Panel. We have the board members, but it's a small place, well located, amazing coffee shops not too far. But what I like, it's really the staff. We have a lot of lifers, I call it in government, is that people love the mandate, super competent, they know what they're doing, great background. So it's a place of professional where I don't feel I need to check in on people, whether they do their work, like they're driven to do their own work. Now, what I like to do is a few reminders. And this is key with the first part of my presentation, okay? We're a tribunal. You have to remember that. We're a tribunal, okay? So the chairperson is the CEO. So in government talk, he's the DM, Deputy Minister, okay? He's part-time, though. He's in Vancouver. And I think Thomas would not be too upset if I say he has no clue about how government works and Treasury Board and all this. So I'm there to assist him on that. But the CEO has two roles, right? He's leading the board itself, the tribunal, but he's also directing the work of the staff, including myself. It is the board that develops and publishes guidelines. It's not staff. So we are there to be the neutral, public servant, making recommendations, providing options. But ultimately, everything you see is coming from the board. They go through line by line and approve the documents that are published. And the way you say, like, there are consultation with the board, you're speaking to the board, their answer is it's always in their official document. So they may hear you on something, they may not agree with you, the answer will be in the publication they do, okay? So only the board, sitting at a hearing panel, can decide whether a price is excessive under the Patent Act. I cannot do it. And the board itself cannot do it unless there's a hearing. The staff, through me, we're carrying the work because obviously we're dealing with 5 board members that are part-time. The discretion to issue a notice of hearing or to close a case rests with the chairperson. It's not me, the DG, that closes cases. It's not me. I was told, oh, you're a nice guy, or you look like a nice guy, so I can trust you. But what if the DGs change? Well, actually, I got no power when it comes to issuing notice of hearing or closing cases. The only thing I do, and obviously it has some weight, is to issue a recommendation to the chairperson to either close a case or go to a hearing. So now we're at the development of the new guidelines. So one thing that is very funny about it is that the board doesn't have to issue guidelines. If you look at the section 96.4, I believe it may issue guidelines. In theory, the board can say, all right, right holders, patentees, you file the information twice a year. We don't have to tell you how we're going to look at it, and there may be a notice of hearing. Obviously, that's not what the board has decided to do. They're going to issue new guidelines. And this is key. Like, the guidelines 2010s were directed at the right holders. Okay? They're basically telling them what to do, to be under a ceiling. What the proposal is right now in the phase 2 of the consultation, and I know I'm jumping, if you're not following the PMPRB activities, you may have a bit of difficulties following me, but the proposal in the discussion guide is guidelines directed at staff. And I know it's a bit different, but it's basically to narrow down where we should put our resources. So basically, if you got 100% drugs, medicine coming, not all of them have issues of potential excessiveness. Where should we focus our attention as to whether we should look at it a little bit more substantially, like looking at various factors. And this is what the discussion guide is trying to do, is trying to identify which cases where I should put my 80 people and look at it so we can make a recommendation to the chairperson. That's what it does. So in theory, you're not capturing all, you're capturing just a small subset of a case of potential cases. So because we identify you to be in in-depth review, like in an investigation, it doesn't mean that the price is excessive. It's just we're going to pay a bit more attention as to whether there's some issues using the 4 factors that I just mentioned. So breaking news, as you guys know, we're developing guidelines. And why are we developing them? Well, as you guys know, there were amendments to the regulation that came into force on July 1st, 2022. And when I say that, basically the PMPRB regulation required the patentees to file information about 7 countries in the past, and now it's 11 countries, and they removed the US and Switzerland. So that's the number one reason. And also, there was a lot of jurisprudence that came out of the court about what we're not. As I mentioned, the Federal Court of Appeal, for example. You're not a general price setter, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, be careful of what you're going to do next. So we are responding to that, and when I say we, I'm talking about the board itself, because it's the board issuing the guidelines, right? So these are the 2 main reasons why we need to modernize, quote unquote, the guidelines. And we are, when we issue guidelines, obliged to consult. And this is what we're doing now. So, for those that follow our activities, the consultation for new guidelines was launched in October 2023. I remember last year, and Joel McCormick was working on the scoping paper at the time that I was there. And the board has decided to do it in 3 phases. The first phase was a scoping paper, big picture, blue sky, where should we be going and all this. And it was completed. There were a policy roundtable in Ottawa in December. We published a What We Heard report, and then from those consultations, the board launched phase 2 of the consultation. I think it was June 26th. We love, by the way, government. We love to issue consultations just before summer or before the holidays. And it's kind of funny. I was thinking, oh my God, am I doing that on purpose? No. There's always in Ottawa, I'll tell you, there's kind of waves in public service. There's fall, then it goes down. Then there's winter, then it goes down in summer. Summer not much is happening, so that's why you get those rushes. And I think that's the only way I can explain why we at the PMPRB publishes closer to when you guys go on holidays or take your summer vacation. So very sorry about that. Phase 2 was through the issuance of a discussion guide. If you look at the reverse triangle, the discussion guide is to say, okay, we heard you on the phase 1. Okay, there's a lot of things we heard that are not part of our mandate. And it's always difficult for the board to say, thank you very much, but no, there's nothing we can do, right? We have to respect the Patent Act. This is what Parliament has intended for us to do, but we hear you. And a lot of the issues about access, and innovation, well, those 4 factors, they don't mention it, access and innovation. That being said, the board is fully aware that things that they do may have an impact on access, right? So they take that into consideration in respecting their mandate. So what is in phase 2 the key, I would say the key issue? There are many more issues, there's some technical issues, but the first thing that the board has proposed, and it's up to them whether they're going to keep that proposal, right? This is what their answer will be in phase 3, is a 60-day review of all medicine below the international price comparison, the IPC, criteria that will be chosen by the board. So, as I mentioned, right holders, patentees, they must file twice a year. So we file the information. The first filing is in January until the end of the month. So within 60 days, whatever the IPC level is chosen, you'll get a letter from the staff say, you're good, thank you very much, see you later. And at this point, it would be an annual review. Even though we're receiving, again, the information in July, that would remain an annual review. So that's the first thing. So that would be pretty easy to understand whether you would be facing an in-depth review, a fuller review by staff, if you are below whatever the IPC level is chosen. And if the drug is launched first in Canada, obviously we cannot do that comparison, so therefore you're automatically reviewed. In-depth review only for certain patent medicine. So in the proposal of the discussion guide, if you are above the IPC, well then it triggers an in-depth review. And at that point, we are looking at the other factors. So we're looking at the initial review looks only at the Canadian price versus the international price. If you are starting the in-depth review under the proposal, then we would look at the TCC. And I know this is where it gets more complicated and it takes more time. And we look at the CPI as well. There's the discussion guide, a potential complaint mechanism from various people. There are, I think, 4 or 5 options if you look at the 4A, 4B. So the reason why complaints would be there potentially, and it's up to the board again to decide whether they want to keep that model, and I know we receive a lot of comments on that issue, is that the IPC threshold is not a perfect one. You got false positive and false negative. But what if there's something we didn't catch? Maybe I made a mistake in English there, I'm not sure. But anyway. Well, the payers, the PCPA, the provinces, or potentially the private insurer, they're in a better position to let us know whether we should look at it from an in-depth review perspective. Now, because a complaint could potentially be filed under that model, that doesn't mean that the price is excessive. It means that at that point, staff will look into the various factors of Section 85, and then be able to make a recommendation to the chairperson who has the discretion to issue or not a notice of hearing. So basically, the chair can close or issue. Now, you're going to ask, and it's not there, for those who were dealing with us, there were VCUs, voluntary compliance undertaking. The C doesn't exist because you don't have to comply with the guidelines. It's up to the companies, but it's an undertaking could be presented to the staff, and then we would present that undertaking to the chair, and the chair say, based on the undertaking of the company to lower its price or pay back excess revenue, we are closing the case. So the undertaking aspect is still on the table, and that's a mechanism that is in place, that would be in place to enable staff to make a recommendation to the chair to close the case. And another key component is there's an annual monitoring of the IPC. So every year, we would do the annual review as to whether your price, the Canadian price, is aligned with the IPC threshold. Now, people call it rebenching. It's not. We're not rebenching. We're just monitoring because this is what our mandate is doing. And in fact, if you look at our own model in 2010, we were doing exactly the same thing. There was a ceiling sent to the patentee or the right holders. We would get the information the year after, and we were checking whether it was in line or not. So it's exactly the same thing, but except of having a ceiling, we're using the international component. That, again, is a proposal. Okay, so the answer to the board as to whether the proposal they made in the discussion guide stands would be, the answer would be in the issuance of a document in phase 3. So we are doing consultation. We did receive submissions, 60-something submission. The board also decided to meet with those who provided submission. It was through Teams. It was not perfect, but I think one thing that we heard as feedback, regardless whether you agree with the proposal or not, is that the fact that people could meet with the board directly was well appreciated. I think this is a model that will likely remain in phase 3. Now, at the end of phase 2, which should be in the coming months, we hope, the board hopes to issue draft technical guidelines. So basically, if you look at the triangle, a little bit more precise, and then again, there will be a consultation period. There will be a chance likely for submission, chance to meet the board members as well. We're hoping, and I'm 90% confident that by the holidays, we will publish the draft guidelines, technical guidelines for consultation for 2 to 3 months. Again, I say 2 to 3 months. I'm not the one making the decision. The board will have to decide that certain aspect. And we're hoping to have final guidelines in the first half of 2025. Now, will there be transition measures in there? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That doesn't mean when we publish the guidelines that they're in effect, although they're not a compliance document. Again, it's going to be up to the board to decide. One thing that is not there, but I get a lot of questions, is that the 2010 guidelines, they don't exist, by the way, okay? They're not existent anymore. I know some people receive information, and the interim guidance, which is something that is in between, is in effect right now. When there's going to be new guidelines, those 2 documents won't exist anymore. So there'll be, all the measures will be contained, whether the existing drug, new drugs, will be contained in the final guidelines, transition measures. So people won't have to look at what happened in 2010, interim guidance, and try to understand the cohesion or non-cohesion between these documents. It will be everything will be at one place. So, conclusion, we're in a huge transition phase. You know, a lot of people, and it's one of my main challenges as Director General, you know, they talk about culture of change, and in government, we don't like it, I guess, but we are really dealing with it at the PMPRB from a staffing perspective, from the way we're looking at things perspective. It's a very ambitious program. My main hurdle is really translation and putting stuff on the web. Our website is terrible, by the way. We know that, we're working on it. And I say that a year ago, too, that it was terrible, but we're seriously working on it. The translation, coding takes a lot of time. And so therefore, sometimes I would be ready a month in advance, but it takes a month just to do all this. Stakeholders engagement is key. I've been at the board for a long time, not as the role at the DG, but I've never seen a board as engaged as this one. Obviously, I cannot speak for the 30 years of PMPRB's existence, but they do listen, they do discuss. I meet my chair every week on Tuesday at 1. Board meetings are taking place more than once a month. Where before it could be like every 3 months or something. So they're highly involved. They read every single submission. They ask key questions to the stakeholders, but also among themselves. Like from a big picture perspective, having 5 people from 5 different backgrounds is actually key to get to, you may not like all the decisions they make, but at least it's an informed and debated decisions they make. And that's it. So more than happy to answer any questions.
Merci beaucoup, Guillaume, Director General.
Yes,
I'm correct my earlier statement. Now, let's have some stakeholder engagement. Questions, comments? If you don't have questions after that one. I was going to ask, why is your website so terrible, but you answered.
I can elaborate on this one, though.
Let's start over. I see a hand up over in the corner. Et vous êtes évidemment bienvenu à demander des questions en français, j'imagine, oui?
Oui.
Voilà.
I'll stick to English, thanks, though.
Well, I'd like to try you in French. All right?
Je vais essayer.
OK, no.
Si vous êtes très patient.
Oh.
So thank you, Guillaume. Joan McCormick with IQVIA. I do PMPRB consulting, so I spy on him a lot. 2 questions. One, at one point during your presentation, you were talking about if a drug comes to market with no countries, and you said that would mean it's automatically reviewed. And I can interpret that sentence 2 different ways. I just want to make sure I've picked the right way. When you say it's automatically reviewed, you don't mean it's going to get the attention of an in-depth review and have all kinds. You mean it's going to just get a check mark beside the box, not have to look at it anymore. It's reviewed.
Well, we're going to do the annual monitoring after that.
Next year.
Yeah, exactly. That means
nothing more that year.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, very good. And my second question is, if a drug is introduced under the new guidelines, so we imagine ourselves in the future, and there's a complaint, let's say, because I'm well aware that the complaints mechanism could change your path from being reviewed to getting an in-depth review. Let's say this complaint happens 5 years after your first sale. From the diagram in the discussion guide, I understand that that means the drug will now be reviewed using all of the Patent Act factors. But my question is, will those factors be applied for the current year when the complaint happened, and the previous year, and all the way back? How does the board envision that end of the process? And maybe it's too soon, but if
that's a really good question. And obviously, again, I'll say that the discussion guide is just a proposal. It's not a decision yet. But because we're looking, again, 2010, they were prospective guidelines. Like basically, if you do that in the future, you'll find. What the DG, the discussion guide is saying is like, we're going to look at the past. So if there was an issue, yes, you could technically go back to, let's say that, like quick review, year 1, 2, 3, 4. Year 5, there's a complaint. Well, we could technically go back to year 1 and say, well, was there a problem since the beginning? Now, that aspect should be clarified in the final guidelines, but technically we're always looking at the past, right? That makes sense, right? Because we're getting the information 6 months later of what happened in the past. We cannot predict the future, but we could look at the past potentially, yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments? Yeah, I see one at the back there. The mic's coming. Yeah, if you're
Hello.
behind a pillar, come out and wave because I can't see everything.
I think I'm hidden, so hi.
Hello?
But anyways, so from my understanding, I see that we have the IPC tests first, and then if we need an in-depth review, then we'll go into the tests were mentioned, such as other class comparators, other drugs, etc. My quick question to you is the following, and you might not have an answer, which is normal because we're crafting the guidelines as we speak. Back then, there used to be comparator tests, such as the linear regressions, different doses, different strengths, etc. I know that we didn't specify exactly which in-depth reviews will be conducted once we get there, but can we assume that PMPRB might look into that sort of craft, or should we take all of that and just park it for now and wait for new guidelines?
No, so it's a, here's the thing, the section about the TCC is a scientific review, so I don't think science will change a lot. That being said, one of the comments we receive a lot is the liking of understanding how the TCC would be. We know that. This is something we're working on, and hopefully phase 3 draft technical guidelines will explain it. But it's a scientific test. It's not a legal test. Okay, so it's science. So I think there's some element that how it was done in the past, how you establish comparators, it should be exactly the same. Again, I'm not a scientific person per se. But there's definitely there's going to be a lot more information about it, and then you'll have a chance to comment as to whether we get it right or wrong into phase 3. Now, that's a scientific test to establish the comparators. Now, how you weight the comparators compared to the actual medicine and its international prices, that's a legal test. And one thing that we heard a lot is that there was a lack of information about how we would conduct in-depth review and how would the factors interplay with each other, like how much weight this versus that. Obviously, what is very difficult in guidelines is to be specific. You cannot, almost. You have to be general. But this is something that we heard, and we're hoping to have an appendix to show example of how we would weight the various factors together in order to make a recommendation to the chairperson. So to answer your question, yes, there'll be a lot more information about how we establish comparators so people know. You may not agree with it, which is fine, because this is why you got potentially a panel, but at least, you'll be able to tell how we are going to establish comparators. And one of the discussion that the board is having is that how much information back are we going to give to the right holders? For example, let's say you start an in-depth review, which is fine. You may feel that the IPC level or the price is justified, i.e. not excessive. Well, one of the things we're working on is how much information are we going to give back to the right holders and allow the right holders to react before it goes to a recommendation to the chairperson. So that's something that the board will be addressing as well.
Quand deux francophones se parlent en anglais, on doit être à Toronto, c'est ça. Alors,
Oui.
any other questions?
Thank you. Merci, Guillaume. Rob Wilson-Croft, Alexion. 2 questions. What kind of stakeholder engagement can we expect moving forward? And secondly, what kind of time frame for patentees to come into compliance once everything is said and done on the guidelines?
So we're not talking about compliance, obviously. You may see it this way, which is fine. For us, it's a process to narrow the cases we're going to look at without making a conclusion about that case. So transition measures is an issue that has not been decided yet. But the board is fully aware that how much time are we going to give, and it depends also on the decisions we're going to make. So I know some of the decisions. Obviously, I cannot disclose them now. That's going to be, and the decision. So there's a lot of interplay between, okay, what would be the IPC level? How much time are we giving? There's an issue about drugs that came in under the old regime versus new regime. There's a lot of questions there. So transition measures will be addressed by the board in the draft technical guidelines. Board is fully aware of that issue. We hear a lot from the distributor, pharmacists, like, impact on the list price and an impact on their own revenue. Although it's not part of a jurisdiction, I think the board is aware of that, the indirect consequences of their decisions. So I don't have an answer for you, but I can reassure you that the board is fully aware of that issue. But we're aiming to have draft guidelines by, hopefully in December. Pretty confident. There'll be a consultation period. I think the board really liked the consultation or the stakeholder engagement via Teams, because I got board members in now Manitoba, Alberta, Vancouver, Quebec, and Ontario. It's a lot easier than flying them down in Ottawa and having people face to face. So I can guarantee you that there'll be more chances for right holders to speak to the board directly about their concern. And if one of the concern is the transitionary measures, especially if you have something substantial to comment on, I think that's going to be easier.
Any others? Okay. I wanted to, if I could, Guillaume, ask you a question. The PMPRB really got beat up by the courts. I'm wondering, were you surprised by the rulings that came? And
is it my personal opinion we're asking, or?
As you wish, as you wish.
No, I'm not. I was not that surprised. Obviously, okay, I'm going to speak government. The PMPRB is independent quasi-judicial. We're not the one deciding which factor is going to go in the regulation. So when the government introduced those factors, like pharmacoeconomics, GDP, market size, I think the government was potentially aware of a risk of a challenge in court. I did my law school in Ottawa U, very strong in constitutional law. And de Montigny was I think he's judge now, I think the head judge of the Federal Court of Appeal. Anyway, so I'm not that surprised what I've seen from the court in terms of what they decided. What I can say now is that we're fully aware of what the court have said, and the board is fully aware. We've spent a lot of time analyzing. What is funny is the court have said what we're not. They didn't say exactly what we are, so they narrowed down or sandbox a little bit to say, well, you are monitoring prices and you intervene only when there's potential excessiveness. So our sandbox may be a bit smaller, but in my mind, we need to be really good when we're playing in it and like being on point. So instead of having a big sandbox, we're going to have a smaller one, but we will intervene at the right place. And I think that will have a great impact as well. If there's some excessiveness, and I think it goes back to the question you asked in your first session, is that I'm representing more the other side of the coin, is like spending and all this. Although my mandate, when I say the PMP mandate is not to have reasonable prices, is not to control cost per se, is to intervene when there's a potential excessiveness.
Okay. So thank you for being there. It's great to have an engaged and lively civil servant for a change at a panel. So great. Thank you.